don't know if I'll live long enough to finish writing this, but I'm gonna try. If you're reading this, then I guess I didn't make it. I'm not even sure why I'm posting it. Maybe so someone can understand the nightmare I've been living for the past few weeks. Maybe so my story doesn't get erased like my life almost was. Either way, I need to get this off my chest before it's too late. It all started about a month ago when I got an anonymous email. Subject line: "You've been targeted." Now, I've seen enough scam emails to know not to click on sketchy links or open weird attachments. But this wasn't like that. It was a plain text message, no links, no bullshit. It just said, "You've been targeted for assassination. A hitman has been hired through the dark web. You have 3 days to live." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some sick joke. Maybe someone trying to freak me out. A spam email gone wrong, whatever. But the thing is, they included a lot of personal details. They had my full name, my home address, my work schedule, even the make and model of my car. That's when the fear started to set in. I'm not the paranoid type, but I couldn't shake it. I started looking over my shoulder more, checking my rearview mirror constantly, locking the doors behind me the second I got inside. I didn't tell anyone about it, because honestly, I didn't want to sound like a paranoid idiot. But by the second day, I couldn't sleep. I was just waiting for something to happen. On the third day, I got another email, same sender. It said, "TikTok." That's it. 2 fucking words, but it felt like a death sentence. I didn't leave my house that day. I called in sick to work and barricaded myself inside my apartment. I don't even know what I was expecting. Some guy to break in with a gun. Someone to poison me or snipe me through the window. I didn't have a clue. I just knew I was running out of time. That night, the real terror started.
Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise from the living room. It wasn't loud, just this quiet scraping like metal against wood. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might stop, but I forced myself out of bed. I crept to the door and peeked down the hall, and that's when I saw it. This dark figure crouched by my front door, working the lock. I fucking froze. I could barely breathe. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. My brain was screaming at me to do something, grab a knife, call the cops, hide, but I couldn't move. I just stood there like a goddamn deer in headlights. The door clicked open, and the guy stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in black from head to toe, face covered by a ski mask. I could see the glint of a gun in his hand. I backed up slowly, trying not to make any noise, but then I tripped over a fucking shoe. The sound was loud enough to wake the dead. He snapped his head in my direction, and I swear to God, our eyes met. I bolted for the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely lock it. I heard him walking toward the door, slow, deliberate footsteps. He wasn't in any rush. He knew I was trapped. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could even hit call, the doorknob started rattling. He was trying to open it, taking his time, like he was savoring the moment. I could hear my own ragged breathing, like I was already choking on my last breaths. Then, the door cracked open. He stepped inside, gun raised, and I swear I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. I thought this was it. I thought I was dead. But then, something weird happened. He didn't shoot me. He just stared at me for a long time, like he was studying me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes burning into me. The tension was so thick I thought I was going to puke. Finally, he lowered the gun and said, "You're lucky." I was too stunned to say anything, but he didn't wait for a response. He just turned around and walked out of the room, out of the apartment, and disappeared into the night. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking, before I worked up the nerve to check if he was really gone. The door was wide open, and my whole body was soaked in cold sweat. But he was gone. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. I felt like I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then 2 days later, I found out why. I was at work, trying to forget about what happened, when I got a call from a blocked number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" I said. The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical. It sounded distorted, like it was coming through a voice changer. "You've been marked dead," the voice said. "The hitman was paid to fake your death. You no longer exist." I nearly dropped my phone. "What the fuck are you talking about?" The voice chuckled. "You're off the grid now. No records, no identity, just a ghost. And soon, you'll be gone for real." I didn't understand. What the hell did they mean, faked my death? I was standing there alive, talking to this freak. But when I got home that night, I understood. There were news articles, my name, my face, all over the internet. But the headlines were insane. "Local man found dead in apparent suicide. Man killed in tragic accident." I checked my social media, and people were posting condolences, saying how they couldn't believe I was gone. My mom had even left a long, emotional post about losing her baby boy. I was fucking dead, on paper at least. My whole life had been erased in a matter of days, and the scariest part was, I didn't know why. That's when the nightmares started, and not the kind you wake up from. I've had nightmares before, but nothing like this. Nothing even close. They started the day after I saw my own death plastered all over the internet. In the dreams, I wasn't just dead. I was being hunted, chased, tortured. Every time, the guy in the ski mask was there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. Sometimes he would speak, whispering things I couldn't make out, but I knew they were meant for me, meant to break me. I wasn't sleeping more than an hour or two a night, and when I did, it was like my mind was a war zone. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I was running a marathon, convinced he was right there in my room. But he wasn't. At least not physically. I tried to tell myself it was over. That maybe the hitman had done what he was paid to do, faking my death. And that was it. I thought maybe the nightmare would fade away, that I'd figure out a way to get my life back, even if it meant telling everyone the truth about what had happened. But the deeper I dug into that idea, the more I realized how fucked I really was. My driver's license? Gone, cancelled. My bank accounts? Frozen, like they didn't belong to anyone anymore. My social security number didn't even exist in the system. It was like someone had gone in and wiped every trace of me off the map. My phone still worked, but that felt like a ticking time bomb. I figured whoever was behind this could cut that off too, whenever they wanted. I was just hanging by a thread. But what really made me snap? The obituary. I didn't know how much worse things could get until I saw it. My own obituary. Some asshole had written it up like I was some tragic case. Local man dies in his sleep, cause unknown. Like I just passed away peacefully. Like I hadn't been fucking terrorized for days before they erased me. It wasn't just the obituary that got me, though. It was the photo they used. A photo of me from a few months ago, back when I still had a life. But it wasn't just any photo. It was one I didn't recognize. It had been taken from the inside of my house at night with me asleep on the couch. I didn't have anyone in my life who would have taken that picture. Nobody had been in my place like that, not recently. I sure as hell hadn't taken it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been inside my apartment. They'd been watching me, probably for days, maybe even longer. I'd been living my life, completely oblivious, while some sick freak was taking pictures of me, planning how they were going to erase me. I wish I could say I handled it well. I didn't. I fucking lost it. Tore my apartment apart looking for cameras, bugs, anything. I didn't find anything, but that didn't make me feel better. If they'd gotten in once, they could do it again. Hell, they could be there right now watching me through the walls. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the windows felt like someone breathing down my neck. Then came the phone calls. At first, they were just weird hang-ups. I'd answer, and no one would say anything, but I could hear someone breathing on the other end. It was so subtle, so quiet, that I almost convinced myself it was just a bad connection. But after a few days, it got worse. I remember one night, I was sitting in the dark, too scared to turn on the lights in case someone outside was watching when my phone rang again. I answered, and there was nothing. Just that faint breathing. I was about to hang up when I heard the voice again. "Did you enjoy the funeral?" My blood turned to ice. "What?" "Your funeral. I was there. It was a nice service. Everyone cried. Ice."
I slammed the phone down, but the calls kept coming. Every few hours, every time, it was that same distorted voice, taunting me, telling me details about my so-called death, things that hadn't even been published yet. How people talked about me like I was some innocent victim. How they'd wondered if it was a heart attack or an overdose. He knew everything, down to the smallest details. He'd been there. He was in my life more than I was. I stopped leaving my apartment altogether. I didn't eat. I barely slept. Every noise became a threat, every shadow a potential killer. I tried blocking the number, but it didn't help. They always found a way to call back. They wanted me to know that no matter what I did, no matter where I hid, they had control. They were always one step ahead. I stopped going online. I didn't want to see any more articles about my own death. But that didn't stop the emails. They started flooding in, from people I didn't know, but all with the same message. "We know you're dead," or worse, "Join us on the other side." The worst part, one of the emails had a video attached. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. It was grainy, the kind of footage you'd see on security cameras, but the content was crystal clear. It was me, lying in a coffin. I could see the chapel around me, filled with people dressed in black, their faces twisted in grief. My mom was there, sobbing into her hands. My friends, co-workers, they all believed it. They thought I was gone. But what shook me to my core wasn't them. It was me. The version of me lying there in the coffin. The version of me that was supposed to be dead. Because as I watched the video, my own corpse opened its eyes, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the black, lifeless stare behind the half-open lids. It wasn't me. Or maybe it was. I don't know anymore. All I know is that whoever, or whatever, was in that coffin, it was still watching me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for the next call, the next email, the next message. But nothing came, just silence, and that was worse. The quiet felt like a noose tightening around my neck, every second stretched out into infinity, my mind racing with thoughts of what they were going to do next. They'd already faked my death. They'd erased me. But why? What were they waiting for? I don't know what's coming next, but I can feel it. Something's happening. Something worse than death. And I don't think I'll survive it this time. I don't know what was worse. The fact that I was dead to the world, or that I was still very much alive, trapped in this hell. The days started blending together, one long stretch of paranoia and dread. I couldn't go outside, couldn't talk to anyone. If anyone saw me, they'd freak out, and I couldn't risk drawing any more attention. Whoever had done this had eyes on me, and if I made the wrong move, I was afraid they'd finish the job for real this time. But the worst thing about being dead? It's the isolation. I used to think being alone was peaceful, you know, a time to think, to clear your head. But not like this. This was different. Being dead to the world meant no one cared about me anymore. No one checked in. No one wondered where I was or how I was doing. My phone had stopped ringing. Even the harassment calls had slowed down. It was like I'd slipped through the cracks of reality. I wasn't just off the grid. I was forgotten. Then things started getting weird. Weirder, I guess. One night, after days of nothing but sitting in my apartment staring at the walls, I heard a knock on the door. My heart stopped. No one ever knocked. I froze, hoping whoever it was would just go away. But the knocking didn't stop. It was slow and deliberate, like whoever was out there knew I was inside. My brain was screaming at me not to open it, but something about the rhythm of the knocks. It was hypnotic, almost like I didn't have a choice. I peeked through the peephole, but I couldn't see anyone, just the empty hallway stretching out into darkness. For a split second, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I'd finally snapped, and this was just another layer of the nightmare I'd been living. But then, another knock, louder this time. I opened the door. The hallway was empty, just like before. But on the floor, right outside my apartment, there was a small package. No label, no return address, just a plain brown box. Something about it made my stomach turn. I knew I shouldn't touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like my body was moving on its own, my hands reaching down, grabbing the box, pulling it inside. I locked the door behind me, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't want to open it, but I had to know what was inside. My hands were shaking as I peeled back the tape and lifted the lid. Inside there was a VHS tape, a fucking VHS tape. Who the hell even uses those anymore? I didn't even have a way to play it. But there it was, sitting in this box like a cursed artifact. Taped to the front of the cassette was a note, written in jagged, uneven letters, "Watch me." Every instinct in my body was telling me to throw it away, burn it, get rid of it however I could. But the curiosity was stronger. I don't know why. Maybe because I felt like I didn't have a choice. It wasn't just about wanting to know. It was like I needed to know. Whoever sent this knew me, knew everything about me, and they were playing a game. I ended up driving across town to this old thrift shop that still sold electronics. I found a beat-up VHS player for $5, brought it back to my apartment and hooked it up to my TV. My heart was pounding the whole time, like I was about to open Pandora's box. When I finally pressed play, the screen went black for a few seconds, then flickered to life. At first, it was just static, but then the image came into focus. It was me. On the screen, I was sitting on my couch, in my apartment, wearing the same clothes I had on right now. The camera was angled from the corner of the room, like someone had set it up to watch me without me knowing. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. This wasn't some old footage. This was happening now. The version of me on the tape didn't move. He just sat there, staring ahead, blank-faced, like he was waiting for something. Then, the door behind him, the door to my apartment, started to open, slowly, just like it had that night when the hitman first came. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. A figure stepped into the frame. Tall, dressed in black, face covered by a ski mask. It was him, the hitman. But this time, he didn't just walk in and leave. This time, he stood there for a long moment, watching the version of me on the couch, like he was waiting for a signal. I was shaking so hard I could barely stay on my feet. Then, as if the figure could sense me watching, he turned and looked directly into the camera. The screen went black. I couldn't breathe. My head was spinning and I felt like I was going to be sick. What the hell was happening? How was that even possible? I was standing there alive, but I had just watched myself, in real time, being stalked by this hitman again, like some twisted déjà vu. Before I could even process what I'd seen, the screen flickered back to life. This time, it was different. It was footage from a different place. It looked like the basement of a house, old, decrepit, with water stains on the walls and dim, flickering lights. The camera was shaking, like whoever was filming it was walking, moving towards something. Then I saw it. A man, strapped to a chair, his face beaten and bloody. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, and his eyes were swollen shut. He was barely breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular bursts. I didn't recognize him at first, but then the camera zoomed in closer. It was me again, or at least it looked like me. But this version of me was broken, a bloody, mangled mess. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, tied up, waiting to die. That's when I noticed something carved into his chest. Deep gashes, like someone had used a knife to write something into his skin. The letters were jagged and uneven, but I could still make out what they said. "You're next." The tape cut out. I stood there staring at the blank screen, my mind spinning. My body was trembling so hard I could barely stand. Whoever was doing this, They weren't just playing with me anymore. This was a warning. They weren't just faking my death. They were coming for me again. And this time, they weren't going to stop until it was real. I don't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They think I'm dead. No one will believe me, not even my own family. I'm completely alone in this. And now, after everything, I don't even know if I'm still alive. If the version of me I saw on that tape is real, or if I'm already dead and this is some kind of sick purgatory. But I can feel it. I can feel him watching me. And I know the Hitman is coming back for me. Soon. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up it was pitch black. The kind of darkness where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. For a second, I didn't know where I was. My heart was pounding in my chest, the kind of panic that hits you before your brain even catches up to what's happening. But then I remembered. I was still in my apartment, still trapped in this fucking nightmare. I sat up, trying to shake the fog from my head, but something felt wrong. The air was thick and cold, like the temperature had dropped overnight. My apartment never got this cold, not even in the dead of winter. I fumbled for the lamp by my bed, my hands shaking so bad I knocked it over. The bulb shattered on the floor, plunging me into even deeper darkness. That's when I heard it. A noise from the hallway. Soft, almost too quiet to notice, but there. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone was creeping toward my bedroom. My stomach dropped. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was in my apartment. Again. I sat there in the dark, barely breathing, listening as the footsteps got closer. My mind was racing. Was it the Hitman? Was he finally here to finish the job? Or was it something worse? Some other sick freak sent to toy with me before they snuffed me out. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could feel my pulse in my throat, pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I didn't have any weapons, nothing to defend myself with. I was a sitting duck, and whoever was on the other side of that door knew it. There was a soft knock. Tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a knock like someone asking to be let in. It was a knock like someone who already knew they were coming inside, whether I liked it or not. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was locked up, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, waiting for the inevitable. The door creaked open. I saw the silhouette before anything else. Tall, broad shoulders, the outline of a hood or mask. The same figure I'd seen in my nightmares. The same figure from the tape. The Hitman. But something was wrong. Very wrong. He didn't move like a person. His steps were too slow, too stiff, like a puppet on strings. His head jerked unnaturally, twitching as if his body was fighting to stay together. I wanted to scream, to beg for my life, but I couldn't make a sound.
He stepped into the room and the temperature dropped even lower. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, each ragged exhale louder than I wanted it to be. He just stood there, staring at me from the shadows. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, boring into my soul. Finally, he spoke. "You don't belong here." His voice wasn't human. It was hollow, mechanical, like someone was speaking through an old radio with the signal just barely coming through. The words echoed in my head, bouncing around like a warning I couldn't fully understand. I managed to choke out a response, my voice weak and trembling. What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, one jerky step at a time. His hand reached up, and I saw something glint in the faint moonlight that filtered through the blinds. A knife, long, curved, with a blade that looked like it had been sharpened 1,000 times. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the sweat-soaked sheets. "Please, don't. I don't understand. You're already dead." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind couldn't process them. Already dead? What the hell was he talking about? "I'm alive," I gasped, my voice desperate. "You faked my death, but I'm still here. I'm not dead." The Hitman tilted his head, the motion sharp and unnatural. "You think this is life?" I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, it didn't feel like life anymore. Every day had become a living nightmare, every second a struggle just to survive. I wasn't living. I was just existing, trapped in a limbo where no one knew I was still here. He moved even closer, the knife glinting again. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might pass out. But then without warning he stopped. And then he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He pulled off his mask. I was expecting to see the face of some hardened killer, some psychopath who got off on torturing his victims. But what I saw was me. It was my face staring back at me, but it wasn't right. It was twisted, distorted, like someone had taken a mold of my face and warped it. The skin was pale, almost grey, and the eyes were empty, hollow, dead.
I told you, he or it said. You're already gone. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like looking into a broken mirror, a reflection of myself that had been shattered into a million pieces and glued back together in the wrong order. My brain was screaming at me to do something, anything, but I was paralyzed. You can't escape it, the thing said, taking another step closer. You were marked the moment you opened the door. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My skin crawled as I realized what he meant. This wasn't just about the hitman. This wasn't just about faking my death. This was something bigger, something worse. I had let something in when I opened that door, something I couldn't understand, something that was feeding on me. The figure raised the knife, and I braced myself for the end. But instead of stabbing me, he slowly lowered the blade to his own chest. Watch. I couldn't tear my eyes away as he began to carve into his own flesh, the blade cutting deep into the skin with a sickening, wet sound. Blood poured from the wound, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just kept cutting, carving something into his chest, the same way I had seen in the video. The letters were jagged, uneven, but I could still read them. You're next. The same words I had seen on the other version of me. The same words that had been haunting me since that night. The hitman, or whatever the fuck he was, stepped back, blood pouring down his chest, soaking his clothes. And then he smiled. A twisted, grotesque smile that didn't belong on my face. You've already let me in, he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. And now there's no way out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The room was spinning, the air too thick to swallow. I wanted to run, but my legs were like lead. I was trapped, not just in this room, but in something far worse. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the hitman turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the darkness. But I knew, deep down, that I wasn't alone. Not really. Because whatever had been watching me, whatever had marked me, wasn't done yet. And I had a horrible feeling that the worst was still to come. I don't even know how long it's been since that night. Hours, days. Time doesn't mean anything anymore. Every second drags like an eternity. Every breath feels like it could be my last. But the worst part, it's not over. I haven't seen him since he left my apartment, but I know he's still there, watching, lurking in the shadows. Every time I close my eyes, I see that twisted version of myself, standing in the dark, staring at me with those dead, empty eyes. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows sends a jolt of terror through my body. I don't know what's real anymore. I've stopped trying to leave. There's no point. No one would believe me anyway. They all think I'm dead. The world has moved on without me, and I'm stuck here, trapped in this living nightmare with no way out. Every time I think about reaching out, calling my mum, emailing a friend, I freeze. What if they don't recognize me? What if they see what I've become, the twisted reflection of myself that's slowly taking over? Because that's the thing, I can feel it happening. I don't know if it's all in my head or if it's real, but I swear to God, something's changing inside me. Little things at first. I'd catch glimpses of my reflection in the mirror, and for a split second, it wouldn't look right. The angles of my face were off, the shadows too deep, like my skin was stretched too tight over my bones. Then, it got worse. I started waking up with cuts on my chest, small at first, like scratches. But every morning they got deeper, more jagged, until they began to spell out words. The same words the hitman had carved into his own flesh. You're next. I'd find blood on my hands when I woke up, my sheets soaked in it. But the thing is, it didn't hurt. I never felt the pain of the cuts, only the cold, sharp realization that I was being marked. I'd watch the blood drip from my fingers, but it didn't feel like it was my blood. It was like I was watching someone else, trapped in a body that wasn't mine anymore. The worst part? The thing that had been haunting me wasn't just some nightmare. It wasn't just a twisted version of me or some figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was coming closer. I could feel it creeping into every part of my life, infecting my thoughts, my mind, my body. It was taking over, slowly but surely. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, me, standing in the corner of the room, waiting, watching. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, that sick smile stretched across his face, blood dripping from the wounds in his chest. And then, 2 days ago, the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer it. I hadn't touched my phone in days, terrified of what I might see or hear if I did. But something inside me, the same thing that had driven me to open the door that night, forced my hand. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest, and pressed it to my ear. "Hello." There was a long pause, static crackling on the other end, before I heard the voice. Not the distorted, mechanical voice I'd heard before. This time, it was my voice. "I'm coming home." I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, but the voice kept going, spilling out into the room like a slow poison. "I'm already inside." I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my car keys and bolted for the door, adrenaline pumping through my veins like fire. I didn't care if anyone saw me. I just had to get out, had to run. I threw the door open and sprinted down the hall, not even bothering to lock it behind me. My car was parked out front, and I didn't stop running until I reached it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition, but I did. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of the parking lot, my tires screeching against the asphalt. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where I was going. I just drove as far away from that place as I could. The city lights blurred past me, the road stretching out into the darkness like an endless void. I drove for hours, until the sun started to rise and the sky turned a sickly shade of grey. That's when I realized something was wrong. The world around me didn't look right. The colors were too dull, the buildings warped and twisted like they'd been melted in a fire. The people on the sidewalks, if they were even people, moved too slowly, their faces blank and expressionless, their eyes black holes staring into nothing. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I tried to catch my breath, tried to convince myself that this was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was just losing it. But then I saw it, in the rearview mirror, him. He was sitting in the back seat, staring at me with those dead eyes, that twisted smile stretched across his face. The knife was in his hand again, dripping with blood, my blood. "I told you," he whispered, his voice a low, sickening rasp. "You let me in." I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was trapped, frozen in place as he leaned closer, his breath cold against my neck. "You're already dead," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "And now, it's time to join me." I felt the knife before I saw it. The cold, sharp blade pressing against my skin, carving the words into my chest. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't stop him. And then everything went black. I don't know if I'm still alive, or if I've crossed over into whatever sick version of hell this is. The world around me doesn't make sense anymore. The people I see aren't real. The places I go don't exist. I'm trapped in a limbo, a twisted reflection of the life I used to know. But the worst part, I see him everywhere. In the mirror, in the windows, in the shadows of every room I walk into. Me. The Hitman wasn't just a killer. He wasn't just some freak hired to fake my death. He was something else. Something I can't explain. And now, he's become me. Or maybe, I've become him. Because when I look in the mirror now, I don't see myself. I see him, smiling, waiting. And I know, deep down, that I'll never escape. I'm already dead.